Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Prince. I'm your co-host, joined by Laurel Collins, my co-host, who I want to welcome back and congratulate on her recent election to the Victoria City Council. Thank you and well done.
Thanks.
I'm glad to have you back on the show. And we have also coming back to the show, someone who's been with us before, Terry Dance-Bennink, Vice President of Vote PRBC. And welcome back, Terry, to our show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me kick it off and say, who does Vote PRBC actually represent? And how many people are connected with your organization? Is it a coalition of allies and other groups? So just let our viewers know who's actually behind you and your organization.
Sure. We were formed about a year ago, actually, the embryo, and it was the two electoral reform organizations. So Fair Vote Canada, BC, and Fair Voting BC kind of were the core. And for the past year, we have been working on broadening it and making it into a large coalition. So we have sectors such as labor, the environment, faith-based, democracy organizations, civic organizations. And when we totaled it all up, we came up with about 750,000 British Columbians that we are collectively representing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 750,000 people belong to these various different organizations.
Yes, our partners. And then as well, as part of the movement, the pro-rep movement, there are allies, significant allies, in particular the NDP and the Green Party, and that's significant because in 2009 the parties sort of held back, but they're in it this time.
Right.
And as well, Fair Vote Canada, Dogwood, Lead Now, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. So it's a big movement now, on a roll.
And pretty well all these organizations have websites.
They all have websites.
You must have a central one, I would imagine, that tries to coordinate some of this information. But for our viewers, they could probably pretty easily go to your site and
VotePRBC.ca.
Okay.
And it has everything you'd ever want to know.
Thank you.
In terms of what people want to know, what's been the focus of your campaign? What's the focus of the messaging you're putting out to people?
I think what we have found really resonates with people is that we need a fairer, more democratic system. I mean, that's the word fair is what hits people, because people are so frustrated with having seen, you know, in the past 18 elections in BC, 17 of them resulted in a minority, you know, a party winning with a minority of the popular vote. And people feel like, why bother voting, you know, if almost 2/3 are not represented in the legislature. So the message of making every vote count, a fair democratic voting system, something that's modern, like what we're using now is an 18th century system. First past the post, like horse racing days, right? So particularly millennials like are ready for something new. And to encourage people to vote knowing that they're going to get what they vote for. So concretely, 40%, if a party gets 40% of the vote, popular vote, then they get 40% of the seats. People understand that and they like it.
And what's the response you've been getting, hearing from people, hearing maybe on the doorstep or as you're out in the communities?
Yeah, we've been relying on all kinds of different ways, you know, to reach people. And so one of our main priorities has been to reach youth. So we have started a student campaign. We've hired 10 young, dynamic student leaders on 10 post-secondary campuses. And so the way the students respond is a little different from how perhaps somebody my age would respond. They're, as I mentioned earlier, they're ready for something new. And they're a lot of them are cynical, and they just feel that they're tired of having to vote strategically. And so they have their own campaign. They've got buttons, they've got their own social media, they're getting pledges from students. And then our organizers will follow up to make sure they vote. So there's that segment. Then our partners, it depends on the partner, like the union, the labor movement, I'm really proud of. I mean, they have stepped up. Unifor, CUPE, BCGEU, the BC Federation of Labor, Health Employees Union. They're all partners and they've all been contacting their own members and sending them emails and texts and talking and explaining. And so, you know, they have, and for them it's a question of having the rights of labor respected and heard, which has not always been the case in the past in BC. So it varies, you know, and then we have our endorsers, one a day on Facebook. You know, it can be, we've had business people endorse us, mayors, councillors, environmentalists like David Suzuki this week just came out in support of us, grassroots people, musicians, comedians, you name it. So one a day. And I think that's been really, really helpful. And then last night, we were appealing to probably an audience that may be undecided, and that's a significant, still a significant portion of voters, and some of your viewers may be in that camp. So we had Andrew Coyne, who writes for the National Post and is on the CBC, the National, often, and he gave an unbelievable presentation. I mean, it was riveting. He really exposed the weaknesses of our current system and addressed all the myths. And I think that was reassuring for that, you know, that category of people. And the results now, we have 1 million people who've seen our website. We have 30,000 people signed up. It's just, you know, and then our partners likewise. So we're excited, but I say all that with a note of caution. Because right now, I think the polls would show that we have a majority, but a slim majority.
In favor of PR,
In favor.
some form
But
of PR.
there's still about 1/5 of voters who are not sure. Right. And so we're taking that very seriously and trying to make sure that the facts are communicated and that people are reassured when they get their ballot that it's doable.
Any sense of how many people may not vote at all in this? One concern is, you know, people might like the idea of PR, but if the overall voter turnout isn't high enough, the government might be on a bit of a dilemma there of having a small number of people endorse time for reform. So what's your sense of, you know, you've got a lot of members, a lot of partners.
Yes. I think we're pretty optimistic that there will be a good turnout. You know, there's been enough activities, like the big pro-rep rally that happened this week was amazing with 1,000 people.
Right.
The Andrew Coyne event last night, and lots of media attention. Yeah. So I think people will weigh in one way or another.
You mentioned a number of your partners, one of them being faith-based groups.
Yes.
And I understand you've been involved with United Church on this. Could you just tell us a bit more about, because sometimes people may not think of churches and faith organizations as being front and center in these sort of political activities, Terry, but tell us a bit more about the United Church's engagement in this and your role in that as well.
I'm proud actually of the church because we had a big conference in June. We had 400 delegates from all over BC. Rural BC, the northern BC, et cetera, and almost unanimously they endorsed pro-rep as a justice issue. So, you know, that says something to when the no side says, oh, rural BC doesn't like pro-rep. Well, that wasn't the case with our delegates. And I think they just felt really strongly that it's a question of justice, you know, it's civil rights, that we have the right to vote, but if it doesn't count, it's not meaningful. And the peoples whose voice is not heard are often the disenfranchised, you know, the poor, the working class, et cetera. And so they took that challenge up, and we have been speaking to all kinds of different churches. We've posted a blog on Vote PRBC. We've held panels. We've communicated with all the different churches to encourage them, actually this Sunday, to raise it with their congregation. So, and we're getting a good response. My church at Esquimalt United, people were very glad to be able to discuss, get their questions answered, and proud that our church is one of the first to step forward in defense of democracy.
Are you hoping other churches or synagogues, others to follow?
Yes, you know, we've been all so busy.
Yeah, it sounds like you have.
I know the Anglican Church, you know, they're seriously involved as well. So we hope.
Okay, great.
We hope others will.
You mentioned the No side talking about regional representation. The No side has come out with a number of critiques of proportional representation and of each of the systems. I know the BC Liberals are encouraging their supporters not to vote on the second part at all after voting potentially no for the first question. How do you respond to some of the critiques you've heard from the No campaign?
I think the two that we sense are the most, that they're focused on the most, and we would say they are relying on a lot of misinformation, frankly lies, and even the mainstream media is starting to call them out on it. For example, the issue of fringe or extremists,
Right.
the fact that the No campaign has funded and is airing a video showing Nazis marching into the legislature. I mean, that is sick, frankly. And Rob Shaw has called them out and said, whoa, this is beyond the pale. Because 90 democratic countries in the world are using pro-rep and none of them have Nazis. So it's blatant fear-mongering. And if anything, you look south of the border and you have what I would call an extremist element in power there, and that's under first past the post. But we respond with facts, and we refer to the fact that that's not the case in the 90 countries that are using it. And then the other issue, of course, that they're particularly trying, I think, to scare people in rural and smaller towns is that you're going to lose your local representative. And again, not true. I mean, we just heard Sonia Furstenau say that they're in the legislation that was passed. Every district will continue to have a local rep. The riding may be slightly bigger, and you may have actually more MLAs to work with from different parties. So the voter will have greater access to decision making, but they will not lose their local representative, and we have to keep hammering that away because that's something that people treasure, rightly so.
On that first point of extremist or fringe parties, the kind of response that I've heard a lot of people is that there's a 5% threshold. Could you explain to our viewers what that is?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the regulations and part of the legislation that came down is that a party to be able to win a seat in the legislature must have 5% of the popular vote. And that's a pretty high threshold.
And that's province-wide,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes. So, that alone is a good caution, and it's a good
And that's a fairly
safety.
standard element in the other 90
It is.
democracies, isn't it?
It
If I
is.
understand, a lot of them have
It
a
is.
5%.
Yeah,
Some have a
or
little
lower even. We're
Yep.
slightly at the high
Higher,
end, so,
yeah.
but good to start that way, I think.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the ballot, because people
Yep.
will have that now at home, and they'll have received, probably before that, a voter's guide from Elections BC, trying to provide some neutral information. If they got the ballot, let's talk a bit about that. Some people think it's complicated, it's confusing. Again, some people may be wanting to whip up the sense of complexity and confusion. How do you respond to that? What would you like to say to our viewers on the questions?
What I've been saying, and I've been going around talking, to different groups and churches, is it's a straightforward ballot. 2 questions. 1, do you want to stick with what we have, first past the post, winner take all, or do you want to move to a proportional voting system? And if you answer any question, that's the one you want to answer, for sure. And we would really encourage people to check off proportional representation. After that, the second question says, if you have an opinion on which proportional representation system you prefer, rank the following 3 systems. So you don't have to answer question 2. We would encourage people to answer question 2.
Right.
Elections BC has sent out great material on it. We have descriptions of those 3 systems. There's lots on the web right now with people weighing in on pros and cons of different systems. And you just rank them. I mean, if you just like one of them, then that's all you do, you check it. But I think the key point that I always stress is they're all good. All 3 of those alternatives. And to be honest, I haven't made up my mind. And I'm not stressed. I'm feeling, hey, this is lovely, that I can actually take my time, mull it over, do a few surveys to see where I land, and I'm not fussed. Whichever one would be much better than what we have now. And usually I find people relax when you say that.
Right.
And so what we're also really encouraging people to do is be sure to vote. So if you've got your ballot, do it now. Don't put it, up on top of a cupboard or throw it out
Right.
or look at it and think, oh, just do it.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I want to thank my co-host, Dr. Michael Prince. My name's Laurel Collins. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. And we will see you in the next segment. Thanks.